They said the Ellison family never celebrated birthdays, at least not after the screams began. In the summer of 1850, deep in the sweltering heart of Alabama, the Ellison mansion stood like a scar on the land, its shutters rattling, its halls whispering names that hadn't been spoken in years. The people of Covington County avoided the road that passed it, claiming the air around the property turned colder, heavier, like the soil itself remembered. On the night of July 16th, a single candle burned in the mansion's upper window. Inside, young Elizabeth Ellison was turning 16, the age her sisters never reached, the age that cursed the family name. She had never met them, but their faces haunted the house, painted portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every step. That night, the clock struck 12, and the silence that followed was not ordinary. It was alive. The wind stopped, the candle flickered, and from somewhere deep within the old house, a voice whispered her name. The story that followed would become one of Alabama's oldest unsolved mysteries, a tale of bloodlines, birthdays, and the terrible promise that refused to die. The Ellison family was among the most respected and wealthiest households in Alabama during the mid-1800s, known for their vast cotton plantations and deep southern roots. They carried their name like an heirloom, proud, unbroken, and steeped in legacy. When the family patriarch, Samuel Ellison, purchased a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Covington County, it was seen as a sign of their growing power and influence. The mansion itself, a towering structure of white columns and dark oak, overlooked acres of fertile fields, yet there was something unsettling about its foundation. The locals whispered that the land beneath it had once been sacred, belonging to a forgotten tribe who vanished long before Alabama was even named. Some said the ground was cursed, that no man could build upon it without inviting the dead to rise again. But Samuel Ellison dismissed those stories as superstition, the kind told by field workers to stir fear in children. To him, the land represented progress, wealth, and the continuation of the Ellison name. Construction began in 1832, and from the very start, strange occurrences shadowed the mansion's rise. Workers reported hearing cries under the soil, as if the ground itself objected to being disturbed. Tools went missing, planks splintered overnight, and one worker was found dead near the foundation, his face twisted in terror, though no wound marked his body. Despite the growing unease, the Ellison mansion was completed a year later, a grand symbol of Southern prestige, gleaming under the relentless Alabama sun. The family moved in with ceremony and celebration, but from the first night there was something wrong. The wind that moved through the halls carried whispers, and mirrors fogged even when no one was near them. The youngest child, little Mary, would often point to corners of the room and say she saw the Red Women watching her. Samuel's wife, Catherine, dismissed it as childish imagination, though she began sleeping with a Bible beneath her pillow. The Ellisons prospered, and their name became synonymous with fortune. Their cotton yields were unmatched, and their wealth only deepened with time. But those who worked the estate often murmured that the soil seemed too rich, the success too unnatural. When crops survived droughts and storms that destroyed neighboring farms, people began to wonder if the Ellisons had received more than just good luck. Catherine, in her quiet moments, began to notice patterns. The family's prosperity always spiked after tragedy in the nearby towns, as if death elsewhere nourished their land. She found dead birds lined across the porch some mornings, their blood pooled in strange circular shapes. When she asked Samuel about it, he laughed it off, saying nature had its mysteries. Yet even he began to feel the weight of the house pressing down on him, especially after midnight, when he would wake to the sound of footsteps pacing outside his door, though no one was there. The mansion itself became a living thing, its wood creaking in rhythm, its walls seeming to breathe. Portraits aged faster than they should have, their painted faces cracking and warping as though time inside the house moved differently. Visitors often left pale and uneasy, claiming they felt watched from every corner. Still, the Ellisons refused to abandon it. Pride and blood bound them to the estate. The family's growing influence blinded them to the truth, that they had inherited not only wealth but a hunger that lingered in the foundation stones, one that would one day demand a price that even their fortune could not repay. Mary Ellison was the pride of her family, the eldest daughter of Samuel and Catherine Ellison, born beneath the heavy Alabama sky in the spring of 1834. From her earliest years, she carried an unsettling grace, beautiful, quiet, and observant beyond her age. Servants often whispered that she was a child too calm for her years, her eyes always distant, as if she could see things others could not. She would wander the halls of the Ellison mansion, humming strange, tuneless melodies and talking softly to the portraits that lined the corridor. The family adored her, but Catherine often found herself waking in the night to see Mary standing at the foot of her bed, staring toward the window as though listening to something that only she could hear. When asked what she was doing, Mary would answer, "They're calling again." As Mary grew older, the mansion's oddities seemed to grow with her. Candles flickered when she entered a room, and the scent of iron would linger in the air after she passed. Her 16th birthday approached in the summer of 1850, and the house began to change. Doors that had stayed shut for years creaked open on their own. The family's dog refused to enter Mary's room, growling at her door for hours before running off into the woods. Catherine became increasingly anxious, insisting that no grand celebration be held, unlike the lavish Ellison gatherings of the past. Instead, she demanded the night pass quietly, with only family present. Samuel disagreed, believing the family's name and reputation demanded festivity, but eventually he conceded to his wife's trembling pleas. On the morning of July the 16th, the air hung thick with heat, pressing against the house like a living thing. Mary spent most of the day in silence, sitting by her window overlooking the cotton fields. Servants reported hearing her speak to someone, though she was alone, whispering phrases they couldn't understand, the syllables heavy and foreign. By evening, the house had grown strangely cold. The candles flickered blue, and the clocks ticked out of rhythm. Catherine tried to stay by her daughter's side, but as midnight approached, an inexplicable dread filled her. Mary excused herself, saying she wanted a moment alone to write in her journal before the clock struck 12. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. When the house fell silent, Catherine noticed the faintest hum, like a voice carried through the walls. Then came the sound of something heavy falling in Mary's room. Samuel broke down the locked door, and the scene before them froze him in place. The window was wide open, though the storm outside had barely begun. The room reeked of iron and wax. Mary was gone, her white dress draped across the floor, and beside it lay a single bloodied ribbon, the one she had worn in her hair since childhood. The floorboards beneath the window were damp, but not from rain. It was as though the house itself had bled. The search lasted weeks. Bloodhounds traced her scent through the fields only to lose it near the old oak tree that stood at the property's edge, the one locals claimed had once been used for tribal ceremonies long before the Ellisons owned the land. No body was ever found. The townspeople whispered that she had been taken by the spirits buried beneath the estate, the ones angered when the mansion was built. Samuel forbade the family from speaking her name after that night, but Catherine continued to leave a candle burning in her window every July 16th. And sometimes, just before dawn, she swore she could see a pale figure standing near the tree line, wearing a white dress and a blood-stained ribbon fluttering in the wind. In the weeks following Mary Ellison's disappearance, the mansion grew unbearably quiet, but the silence carried weight as if it were listening. The servants who remained on the estate spoke in hushed voices, afraid to mention her name aloud. Catherine Ellison wandered the halls clutching her daughter's bloodied ribbon, her mind unraveling under the strain of not knowing what had happened. Samuel tried to maintain order, forcing the household to continue as if nothing had changed, but there was no pretending that the Ellison mansion had become something else entirely. It was no longer a home. It was an echo chamber for grief, and soon those echoes began to speak back. It started small. The maids claimed they could hear faint laughter coming from Mary's room late at night, long after the door had been sealed. The sound was light and girlish, the kind that used to fill the house during happier days. At first, Samuel dismissed it as wind through the chimney or the servants' hysteria. But one night, while inspecting the upper floors himself, he heard it too. The laughter was followed by a soft humming, a tune Mary used to hum when she walked through the halls. He froze outside her door, the same one he had broken down weeks earlier, and felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched from the other side. When he pushed the door open, the room was empty. The window stood wide as before, and the candle on the table burned steadily, despite the lack of anyone to light it. By the time autumn arrived, the whispers had spread beyond the mansion. Travelers passing along the road claimed to hear cries drifting through the trees near the Ellison property. Some said they saw candlelight flickering in the upper window on stormy nights, always on the 16th day of each month, as if the house itself kept track of time in a way no living being could. Those who dared to approach closer reported hearing girls' voices, faint and overlapping, whispering names, laughing, sometimes weeping. The locals began referring to it as the crying house, and the Ellisons' once esteemed reputation began to crumble. Catherine grew pale and sickly. She refused to leave the mansion, insisting that her daughter was still there, just not in the same way. Her grief turned to obsession. She would sit in the parlor for hours, listening to the walls as if they were speaking directly to her. One night she woke Samuel, claiming Mary had come to her bedside and whispered something she could not understand. Her husband brushed it off as a nightmare, but when he turned to look at her, he saw tiny fingerprints pressed into the frost on the bedroom mirror. Small, delicate, and perfectly shaped. There was no explanation, and after that, he stopped arguing with her. The servants began leaving one by one. Some claimed to have seen a young girl standing in the hallway at night, her dress soaked as if she had been caught in the rain. Others found mirrors fogged with words scrawled by unseen hands. Always the same phrase, 16 again. The air inside the mansion turned cold even during the height of summer, and the scent of iron seemed to linger in every corridor. Samuel ordered every window nailed shut, but no matter how many precautions he took, the whispers continued. Each year, as Mary's birthday approached, the mansion grew restless. Doors slammed without cause, the piano in the parlor played by itself, and shadows moved across the staircase with no source of light. The locals swore the Ellison estate came alive during that week as if it remembered. Some nights, travelers heard the sound of girls singing, a faint, mournful melody carried by the wind. And always, just before midnight, the laughter began again, echoing through the fields, winding its way through the darkness until it reached the road where no one dared to linger. Those who did claimed that if you listened long enough, the laughter would stop, and a single whisper would follow, calling you by your name. A year after Mary's disappearance, the Ellison mansion still carried her presence like a shadow that refused to fade. Every room seemed to remember her, every mirror caught glimpses of her shape, and every gust of wind through the corridor whispered her name. The family had tried to move on, but grief had become part of the house's rhythm. Catherine Ellison no longer smiled, her hands always trembling as she traced invisible patterns on the dining table where Mary once sat. Samuel grew cold and withdrawn, throwing himself into plantation work, though he seldom visited the mansion's upper floors anymore. Only their second daughter, Clara Ellison, remained untouched by the silence, at least for a time. Clara was 15 now, gentle and bright, with the same striking blue eyes her sister once had. But as her 16th birthday crept closer, the same dread that had haunted her mother began to stir again. It began with dreams. Clara would wake screaming in the middle of the night, gasping that Mary was standing by her window, her dress wet and her hair tangled, whispering, "It's your turn." The maids tried to comfort her, though they too confessed to hearing faint singing near her door. Catherine, desperate to protect her only remaining daughter, called for a priest from Montgomery, hoping to bless the house. But when the priest arrived, his horse refused to approach the mansion gates, neighing and trembling violently until he was forced to proceed on foot. He sprinkled holy water on the door frames and recited prayers in every room, though by the end of the night he appeared visibly shaken. Before leaving, he whispered to Samuel, "Some doors were never meant to be blessed." As the day of Clara's 16th birthday approached, the Ellisons took every precaution imaginable. Her room was sealed from the inside with heavy bolts, and Catherine insisted on staying awake through the night outside her door. The clocks in the mansion were all stopped before midnight, as if denying time could delay the inevitable. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive. Clara lay awake, staring at the candle beside her bed, its flame trembling like it feared what was coming. Outside, thunder rolled low in the distance, though no rain fell. She tried to pray, but each word felt heavy, swallowed by the air before it could reach her lips. Around midnight, the family heard a faint knocking sound from behind Clara's door. Catherine called out, but there was no answer. The knocking grew louder, rhythmic, almost like footsteps pacing from one end of the room to the other. Then came the unmistakable sound of laughter, soft, childlike, echoing through the corridor. Samuel rushed forward and tried to open the door, but the lock held firm. He shouted Clara's name, demanding she respond, but only the laughter continued. Catherine screamed, begging her husband to break down the door, and with one final strike, it gave way. Inside, the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the candle still burning steadily. The windows were sealed, untouched. The only trace of Clara was her silver necklace lying in the center of the floor, the chain snapped clean in two. On the wall, faintly visible in the candlelight, were handprints smeared in dust, one larger, one smaller, as if two people had pressed against it from opposite sides. Samuel tore through the room searching for any sign of escape, but there was none. Catherine collapsed to the floor, clutching the necklace, her sobs echoing against the walls that now seemed to hum with a low, throbbing sound, almost like a heartbeat. By morning, word had spread through Covington County. The Ellison Curse, as people now called it, had claimed another daughter. Neighbors spoke of seeing light flickering in the upper window just before midnight and hearing two voices singing together, one high and young, the other low and familiar. The priest refused to return, saying the house had chosen its own. Catherine never entered that room again. From that night onward, the Ellison mansion became more than haunted. It became a warning whispered across Alabama, a place where birthdays meant endings and the living were never truly alone. After Clara's disappearance, the Ellison mansion became a hollow shell filled with ghosts of memories and the unrelenting grief of a mother slipping into madness. Catherine Ellison's mind began to fracture under the unbearable weight of losing two daughters in the same unexplainable way. She refused to leave the house, claiming her children were still there, that she could hear them if she only listened closely enough. Servants would find her wandering the halls late at night, her nightgown soaked with tears, whispering softly as if in conversation with someone standing just out of sight. She spoke to the walls, the mirrors, the empty chairs, insisting her daughters were speaking back. At first Samuel tried to reason with her, but every night she grew further from the woman he once knew. Her eyes lost their focus. Her voice trembled with devotion to something no one else could see. She began to place two plates at the dining table during breakfast, one for Mary, one for Clara, and would scold anyone who tried to remove them. The maids began refusing to enter her chambers. They said she kept the windows closed and the air heavy with the smell of burning wax. Some claimed that when Catherine prayed, her voice was not alone, that a faint echo repeated her words in a child's tone. One night, a servant girl ran screaming from the parlor after witnessing Catherine rocking an invisible child in her arms, humming an old lullaby that the daughters used to sing before bed. Her husband dismissed these stories at first, believing grief had turned his wife into a specter of herself. But as weeks passed, even he began to feel the weight of something unnatural pressing in on their home. The mirrors fogged for no reason, and Catherine's reflection sometimes appeared in them before she entered the room. Samuel arranged for a doctor from Montgomery to visit, but Catherine refused to be examined. She accused him of bringing outsiders to separate her from the girls, claiming the doctor's presence angered them. When the man finally managed to step inside her room, he noted that the temperature dropped suddenly, his breath visible despite the summer heat. He left before sundown and never returned, telling Samuel that what afflicted his wife was beyond medicine or reason. Catherine's behavior grew stranger. She began collecting hair ribbons, locks of her daughter's hair, and small objects from their rooms, arranging them into circular patterns on the floor. She said the girls had asked her to. At night, she lit candles in those circles, chanting softly in a language she had never spoken before. The servants heard her through the doors, her voice rising and falling like waves, sometimes breaking into laughter, sometimes into sobs. One evening, Samuel entered her room to find every candle extinguished except one, burning near the center of the pattern. Catherine sat on the floor, her head tilted upward, smiling faintly. When he asked what she was doing, she whispered, "They're almost ready." That night, Samuel ordered the servants to keep watch over her. But by morning, every candle had burned down to nothing, and strange markings, symbols no one could decipher, were carved into the floorboards. Catherine had no memory of doing it, or so she claimed. By autumn, she had stopped eating. Her body withered, but her eyes remained feverishly bright, as though she were seeing something beyond the living world. When storms rolled across the sky, she stood by the window, holding her daughter's hair ribbons and calling out into the wind as if expecting an answer. The servants swore that during one storm, the voices did answer, faint, childlike whispers that rose and fell between the thunderclaps. Catherine smiled then for the first time in months and said, "They promised they'll never leave me." From that night on, she spent her time in the parlor, speaking softly to unseen figures, her laughter echoing through the dark halls of the Ellison mansion, until even her husband could no longer bear to look at her without feeling that she was speaking not as a grieving mother, but as something the house itself had claimed. The Ellison tragedy soon became more than a family's misfortune. It turned into a dark inheritance that passed through generations like a disease no prayer could cure. After Catherine's mind gave way completely, Samuel Ellison withdrew from society and shut the mansion off from the world. He boarded up the upper floors, dismissed most of the servants, and lived out his days in silence, haunted by the sound of laughter that no longer belonged to the living. When he died a few years later, the estate fell to his only surviving son, Thomas Ellison, who was still a child at the time. By then, the story of the vanished daughters had already become legend in Covington County, whispered from porch to porch as a warning about the price of pride and the weight of cursed blood. Thomas grew up under the shadow of that legacy, and though he tried to restore the family's reputation, the curse remained, hidden but waiting. As Thomas grew into adulthood and started a family of his own, the pattern began to show itself again. His first daughter, Margaret, was born on a hot August morning, her arrival celebrated with hesitant joy. For the first few years, she was healthy and radiant, a symbol of hope that perhaps the curse had died with her grandparents. But as her 16th birthday approached, the familiar unease began to settle over the mansion once more. Servants heard footsteps in the halls after dark, though no one was awake. Doors opened on their own, and faint voices murmured in rooms long sealed shut. One morning, the old nursery door, locked since Mary and Clara's time, was found wide open, the toys inside arranged in a perfect circle on the floor. Thomas dismissed it as a prank, but his wife Eleanor felt the chill that ran through the air every time their daughter entered that room. On the night of Margaret's 16th birthday, the Ellison mansion seemed to hold its breath. No celebration was planned. Eleanor had begged her husband to cancel everything, terrified of what might come. As midnight approached, the house fell into an unnatural stillness. Thomas, determined not to lose another child to fear, kept watch outside her room, his revolver in hand. But when the clock struck 12, the candlelight in the hallway dimmed to nothing, and he felt the cold touch of air that smelled faintly of lilacs and blood. A whisper brushed against his ear, a young girl's voice, saying, "It's already done." He burst into Margaret's room, only to find it empty. The window was shut tight, just as before, but the mirror above her vanity was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, the reflection warped and trembling. On the floor beneath it lay a single white ribbon, stained with something dark. The townspeople said the Ellisons were cursed because their blood had been marked by something unholy long ago. Every daughter, born from that line, would vanish on her 16th birthday, claimed by whatever force had been awakened beneath their ancestral home. The strange part was that the sons always lived long, often wealthy lives, but their happiness was hollow, haunted by the knowledge of what would come for their daughters. The curse did not stop with Margaret. It repeated, generation after generation, like a clock striking the same fatal hour every few decades. Some tried to escape it by moving away, but the curse followed wherever Ellison blood flowed. It wasn't the mansion alone that was haunted. It was their lineage itself. Over time, the Ellison name became synonymous with dread. The once grand estate fell into decay, its walls collapsing under years of neglect. But still, people swore they could see candlelight flickering in the upstairs windows on certain nights. Each time a new daughter was born into the family, the air around the property grew colder, as though the house knew another offering would one day return to it. The Ellison bloodline endured, but it did not live. It lingered, trapped in a loop of grief, fear, and the endless echo of footsteps belonging to daughters who never reached 17. Decades after the Ellison mansion had been abandoned, the last known descendant of the bloodline, a young man named Jonathan Ellison, returned to the crumbling estate determined to uncover the truth his family had buried for generations. He had grown up hearing the stories, the missing daughters, the whispers in the walls, the cursed birthdays, but he never believed them. To him they were tales crafted by frightened minds, superstitions carried by townsfolk who needed a monster to blame for tragedy. The mansion, though, felt different the moment he stepped inside. Dust clung to the air like memory, and the faint smell of burnt wax lingered in every corridor. The silence had a pulse, almost as if the house itself was breathing around him. Jonathan carried a lantern and a stubborn resolve, but neither comforted him as the old wood groaned beneath his boots, echoing through the empty rooms that once belonged to his ancestors. He was not there to mourn. He was there to find answers. As he searched through the mansion, he discovered that most of the upper rooms had been sealed with boards nailed from the inside, the wood warped and cracked from time. In the study, buried beneath piles of yellowed letters and ledgers, he found a locked chest marked with the initials S.E. for Samuel Ellison, the family patriarch. The lock was rusted, but after forcing it open, Jonathan found something unexpected inside: an old, leather-bound journal. The cover was brittle and darkened with age, the edges stiff with dried wax. Inside, the handwriting was uneven, as though written in haste. It was Samuel's own hand. The first pages spoke of business and the plantation's growth, but deeper into the book, the tone changed. The entries became fragmented, desperate. Samuel wrote about how the Ellisons' fortune had begun to falter despite years of prosperity, and how, in his desperation, he had turned to an old ritual told to him by one of the field workers, a descendant of the very tribe whose burial grounds the mansion was built upon. The ritual was simple, Samuel wrote. The land would grant prosperity and protection to the family who lived upon it, but it demanded payment, the blood of the firstborn daughter from every generation. He dismissed it as a myth at first, but when his crops began to fail and debts mounted, fear made him reckless. One night, he performed the ritual in secret, burying a small carved totem beneath the foundation of the new mansion, sealing it with a prayer he barely understood. Within weeks, the plantation flourished beyond expectation. The cotton grew thicker, the rains came exactly when needed, and the Ellison name rose to prominence. Samuel convinced himself it was coincidence, but as Mary's 16th birthday approached, the dreams began. He wrote of hearing voices calling his name from beneath the floorboards and seeing shadows that moved independently of light. His wife grew ill, and their daughters began to speak of figures that watched them in the corners of their rooms. Samuel tried to destroy the totem, but each attempt ended in failure. The ground where he had buried it would not open, as if something alive held it shut. Jonathan read the final entry with shaking hands. It was dated the night before Mary's disappearance. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smudged by sweat. Samuel confessed that he had made a pact, one he could not break. The house, he wrote, was bound to it now, and so was the bloodline. The land remembers. It takes what it is owed. The last line trailed off mid-sentence, as if interrupted. Jonathan felt a chill creep through him as he realized the pattern that had haunted every Ellison daughter was not coincidence. It was payment. The prosperity that had once lifted the family name had been bought with their blood. Every vanished daughter had been claimed to uphold the bargain that Samuel Ellison had struck with something older than any god he knew. Jonathan dropped the journal to the floor and listened. Somewhere deep beneath the foundation, he heard it. A low, rhythmic pulse, like the beating of a heart buried in the ground, reminding him that the Ellison debt was still being collected. By the year 1850, the Ellison mansion stood in a state of quiet decay, its walls heavy with secrets and the faint echo of generations long gone. The last daughter of the bloodline, Elizabeth Ellison, was nearing her 16th birthday, the cursed age that had claimed every firstborn girl before her. The townspeople had already begun whispering that the curse would awaken again. For each time an Ellison daughter reached that age, the air in Covington County turned strange. The sky dimmed earlier than usual, the birds fled the trees, and the wind that passed over the mansion carried the sound of faint laughter. Inside, Elizabeth lived in constant dread, haunted by the stories she had overheard since childhood. Her mother, Rebecca Ellison, forbade any mention of the past, but Elizabeth could feel it pressing down on her, the same invisible force that had stolen her sisters before she was even born. She would wake in the night to the sound of footsteps outside her door, always stopping just as she whispered hello. And sometimes, in the flicker of candlelight, she swore she saw two faint shapes standing at the end of the hallway watching her. As the day of her 16th birthday drew closer, the mansion began to stir again. Mirrors clouded with frost despite the southern heat, and the clocks, though wound tightly, refused to keep time. The servants avoided Elizabeth's room, whispering that her laughter echoed seconds after she stopped speaking, as if someone unseen were repeating her words. The family priest, sent for by her mother, refused to stay past sunset, claiming the house was breathing in a way no home should. Elizabeth's father locked her bedroom door each night, but that only made her feel more like a prisoner than a daughter. She took to writing in her journal, recording each strange event. The shadows that lingered too long, the soft singing she heard beneath the floorboards, the way her reflection sometimes smiled even when she did not. On the eve of her 16th birthday, a thunderstorm rolled across Alabama. The air grew thick and electric, and the mansion groaned with each strike of lightning. Elizabeth sat by the window, her candle trembling, her heart racing. Her mother prayed in the hall, whispering the Lord's name through cracked lips, but the sound was drowned by the howl of wind. Just before midnight, the entire house fell still. The thunder stopped. Even the rain seemed to hang suspended in the air. Elizabeth turned toward the mirror, and for a moment she saw her reflection clearly, until a second figure appeared behind it. It was a girl, pale and hollow-eyed, her hair soaked and tangled, wearing the same kind of white ribbon her mother kept locked away in a box. Then another girl appeared beside her, and another. All three looked like her. Elizabeth froze as they reached toward the glass, their fingers pressing against it from the other side. The mirror rippled like water. A whisper filled the room, soft and sweet, the same words written in Samuel Ellison's old journal. The land remembers. It takes what it is owed. Rebecca heard the scream from downstairs. When she burst into the room, the candle had burned out, and the storm outside was gone. Elizabeth's bed was empty, her journal open beside a single damp footprint. The mirror was unbroken, but something shimmered beneath its surface. Movement that should not have been there. Her father called for help, but no one would step foot inside. By morning, the mansion was silent again, the air thick with the scent of lilies and smoke. Word spread quickly through Covington County that the curse had claimed its final daughter, and that night the people who lived nearby swore they saw all four girls, Mary, Clara, Margaret, and Elizabeth, standing in the upstairs window, their faces pale in the moonlight, holding hands and smiling faintly as if finally reunited. Since then, every July 16th, the old Ellison estate glows faintly from within, and those who pass by say they can hear the faint echo of laughter carried through the wind, soft and distant, reminding the living that some deaths never die. So if you want more haunting stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.